So, first things first, is the mic on? I think it is. I'm seeing a monitor line saying that the mic is on, and I'm not yet seeing anybody saying we can't hear you. So that is a plus, I think. Welcome. Thanks once again for joining me, Will Todd, for another presentation and discussion about my music. If you're returning, thank you. And if you're new, this is the third in a 5-part monthly series running until May, so please come back for more if you enjoy it. Tonight then, a work from 2009 commissioned by the Fairhaven Singers. This is my Requiem for Voices and Electric Guitar. I've altered the format just a little bit this time because I'm delighted that two of the creatives central to the Requiem project have helped me out with the presentation. So conductor Ralph Woodward and guitarist Tom Gray are going to talk on the presentation and give you an insight into the commissioning process as well as the techniques being used on the electric guitar, which I think you'll find very interesting. This piece, the Requiem for Voices and Electric Guitar, has a very wide spectrum in terms of its use of tonality and harmony. There's some very dissonant music in the Requiem, and then other parts that are very tonal and very lyrical. And I just wanted to kind of give you a tiny insight into that before we go on to hear from Ralph and Tom. At one end of the spectrum is the dissonant music, and this is kind of exemplified in one of the themes of the Requiem. It's the opening theme you hear, actually, which makes use of something called a 12-note row. Many of you may know what a 12-note row is, but of course, as you will also know, if you know that, you're in an incredibly tiny niche group of people on earth who know that. So in case you don't know what a 12-note row is, it's the idea of creating a theme or a group of notes where you use all 12 semitones of the Western chromatic scale without repeats. And then you would start repeating again in sequence. And it's a technique which has been around since the start of the 20th century. Composers have used it in all sorts of different ways. I use it because you can create wonderful dissonance with it, but also great beauty. It also can give you a sense of not quite knowing where the tonal centre of the music lies. So the theme, I'm just going to play this to you, and it comes quite a lot in the Requiem. This is the opening 12 notes, and it is a 12-note row. So there they are, all 12 semitones without repeats. And then, to contrast that, just showing you what I think of as the main Requiem theme, the Requiem theme because it's used on the words Requiem Aeternam. And this is very diatonic, it's in a Dorian minor scale, and you get this. Requiem Aeternam. Dora est Domine aeternam requiem. So that very diatonic, very secure relationship to the home note. And this piece really explores the fringes between those two. On the one hand, very diatonic, very lyrical music, and on the other hand, very dissonant and sort of angry music. So we're going to go into the presentation now. It's about 25 minutes, and after that, as usual, I'd love to answer your questions, so please add those anytime to the chats, either on YouTube or on Facebook, and I will endeavour to answer those in the second half of the presentation. If you can write question in capitals, it does help me get to them. So if you can remember to do that, that's really helpful. So here's Ralph Woodward and Thomas Gray being interviewed by me about the Requiem for Voices and Electric Guitar.
For me, something like Requiem, and it goes in my mind somewhat with Mass in Blue, which is obviously a very different work, but they're both works that seem to me to be very kind of demonstrative of some of what you bring to the table. So obviously the whole jazz element in Mass in Blue, but there's some sort of jazz folk pop stuff bubbling under the surface of Requiem as well, I think. And also obviously your whole engagement with choral music, the choral music of your contemporaries. So I think the Requiem would be different if people like John Rutter and John Tavener weren't somewhere in your brain.
First memory of working on this, Will, we had met and worked together on a wonderful streetwise opera project that you wrote called Whirlwind, and that had included some conventional guitar, including some acoustic, but also you explored with me some kind of sound worlds that took it out of the conventional guitar sound. So we'd already had a look at what might be possible in terms of slightly unconventional sounds coming from a guitar. That was sort of 2006, and a couple of years later you came to me going, "Hey Tom, can we take this a bit further maybe?" That's my first memory.
For me, the Requiem, I suppose, grew out of an ambition on the part of the Fairhaven Singers, who I'd been conducting, I guess, for about 10 years then, to broaden our activities and get involved in commissioning. So I took over the choir in 1997, and I think you and I had our first discussions about the Requiem in about 2006. question of guitar was interesting, and funnily enough, you and I sort of had the same idea independently at about the same time. I said, it could be for quite small scoring, maybe choir and string quartet, or solo guitar ... and you kind of picked that up and ran with it. Different composers have set different parts of the Requiem. And I remember at some point, fairly early in the planning of the piece, you asked me to send you the text. So I think I more or less compiled the maximum it could be, which is like Mozart plus Fauré and bits and pieces.
You had some creative thoughts and sounds and ideas in your head already. I think maybe even some sketches. Particularly this idea of getting guitar away from a percussive instrument where you pluck a string, and you get something coming out, into something more, well, we use the term bowed, like a string instrument. Now, with the guitar turned down, just like if I strum, the microphone I'm speaking through will pick it up. You'll hear a very gentle strumming. Very familiar sound. If it was an acoustic guitar, it would come out with a lovely woody tone. Electric doesn't have that. So you plug it in and it will go to an amplifier, which then goes to a speaker. Very simple. That's the old traditional way. And then you'll get something like a sort of very straightforward, familiar, clean guitar sound, what we call clean. If I just switch over to it could be called distorted, dirty, heavy, overdriven. They're all the same terms, really. You get a fuzzy, saturated, very familiar sound, which leads into the classic sort of, the lead guitar tones we've all heard. That was quite a mellow one. You could be muttering Brasher. That's a heavy rock tone, that one. So there we go, distorted and clean, and they're the two basic sounds that I use. There are many permutations in between, of course, if you want. I was always fascinated. As soon as I could get my hands on guitar, on effects pedals, I wanted to explore, to take the guitar into, the sort of bigger dimensions, if you like. I was always really, really sort of wowed when I heard records with a really echoey guitar. Sort of not just sounding in your face and up front, but sort of drifting around and sort of having this incredible sustain or ambience. And singing, that singing tone, I was always fascinated by that. Now, if I turn on my echoes, which are, I think, here, I'll just play these to you. That's that's an awful lot of echo. There repeats. Now, the reason I've got a lot of echo is because what I'm demonstrating is actually the very beginning of the Requiem. You can have long, short, fast, slow echoes. You can design them to be however you want. If anyone knows the music of U2, those of a certain age, the guitarist in that uses echoes for everything, for absolutely... he set up rhythmic patterns with it. With a delay, you play one note, the echo plays 3 back to you, so that can be very useful. But yes, that's a clean sound with the echo, with a percussive But then if we start adding this swell, volume swell that I talked about, I've stopped playing and it's still carrying on, but you're not hearing the attack of the note, and that's something rather beautiful. So that's a really nice sort of starting point for getting something a bit smoother. Then we go into distortion. So I'll turn the echoes off again. I'll go to a distorted sound. Pretty gross and sort of, not gross, just, you know, it's what you expect, dirty. But I don't want it, I want it to sing, and I want it to sound smooth and lovely. So I turn the echoes on, turn the volume down, hit a note, open E string. And then we have a foghorn. But if we start going higher registers with that, then we're entering a realm of, I don't know, melancholy, beauty, a completely different sort of atmosphere. And that's sort of where we really started, I think, with the Requiem.
With new works, I think the first challenge is always kind of convincing the choir that it's a really good project to be involved with. Now, I'm not saying that there was lots of resistance from the choir, but there is always, when you're taking on a piece that ended up, 50 minutes long or something, there's always a stage to be got through of saying, this is really cool.
Let me just give you a quick taster of the opening. I won't do the whole tone row, but the first note you hear is that low open E. So that's just the first half of that beautiful tone row. As you say, then it gets repeated higher. Now, the guitar, let me turn this off and quickly show you the range of the instrument. We start normally from a low E, and we can go with this guitar right up to a high E, really high E, which is, gosh, 2, 3 above middle C. So that's a pretty big range. but you wanted more. Both in both directions, and we'll get to that in a minute. Now, this guitar is a 7-string, so it has a low B, which is going down to the kind of the lowest note that bassists sing in a choir, pretty much. So that's a really big range, a low B up to a very high E. But we wanted to extend that even further. So again, I'm very lucky with the technology now. Looking at the pedals, there's something here called a whammy, which is a funny name. It's not the only thing that does this. Pitch shifters have been around since the late 70s, actually. So I can now use this whammy device, just get the right setting, to take notes. Not only that's the root note, we can now take it up 2 octaves if we want to, and that's what we're doing with this. So up 2 octaves, that note then becomes, which is extraordinarily high, really. Combined with the sustainer, as I'm doing now, and we've got endless sustain on these wonderful high notes. That's without the echo as well.
So many people who come to hear choral music won't have heard much music like your Requiem for choirs, but crucially, they heard very confrontational and abrasive music in the context of film scores and TV music, for instance. So I think writing a piece like the Requiem is not a problem in terms of confronting an audience in the way that, The Rite of Spring was in 1913 or something. It's not people don't think be kind of shocked and sort of pinned back to their seats in horror by a piece like your Requiem. I mean, if it was like that all the way through, if the whole thing were angry cadenzas from guitar and atonal clusters from the choir, that would be problematic. But of course, the piece isn't like that at all. It's got many very, lyrical, tonal, melodic, expressive moments.
There's another gadget on the guitar. It's a very old one, actually. It goes back to the early days of... Better just turn some things off here. The days of rockabilly in the 1950s, and it's known as a tremolo arm. It should be called a vibrato bar, because it does vibrato, not tremolo. Vibrato is pitch, tremolo is volume, but it's known as a tremolo arm. These misnomers kind of creep in. Now what that does, you can see it here, is very simply change the pitch like that there. So you can have a gentle vibrato with it, right through to the point where you can slacken the strings off, so they rattle like this and make pure noise. Combine that with the other things we spoke about, and you have something pretty disturbing. So echoes, distortion, and then using this vibrato bar, this whammy bar as it's known, to detune the strings so they rattle, bring in the volume with the volume button. And that at a high volume in a big building is thunderous and rather cataclysmic. It feels like quite a to do that as a musician, because it's not like a concerto where it's like, okay, show off your stuff now. This is a very, very serious, emotional, spiritual point in the piece. Plus, it's a moment to show the guitar in all its sort of raging glory, if you like. You did put some guidelines in right at the beginning, just some pointers which I did follow, and then I kind of went out on my own. But I remember you saying it'd be really nice to have a quiet statement of the Requiem theme. There's a little blues theme that I say blues, it's a blues scale, isn't it? So Dorian mode, I say, more than blues, I guess. But it's a beautiful, it's sort of the main Requiem theme, most of the row. And you said, please, could I place that in there? And it's wonderful because there's all this raging and wailing, and in the latest version that I sort of tried to work out for the last performance, I end up on this high E. It's all this C Lydian sort of crazy stuff.
think it was on the day of the premiere in St John's, Cambridge, and after the rehearsal, you said to me, "Well, the choir just don't believe in this work, do they?" I thought, well, obviously, I was kind of distressed that what we were doing was making you think that. I remember saying, "I don't think that's quite true. They're just a bit frightened at the moment, you know."
I've only done it 3 times myself with an audience, and once recently with Ralph again in Cambridge, which was extraordinary. It was sort of transcendental, most of the experience. However, I was at the time I'm adrenalized and completely caught up as well in am I hitting the right buttons at the right time. It's a very, very complicated. It's sort of using every aspect of your sort of artistry and technical brain at once. But I'm also aware that there was a chapel full of people who had been led on this journey with you. I felt very supported. And I felt that people were kind of almost slightly hypnotised. No, that's the wrong word, but entranced, I hope, in a good way. Exploring death in all its aspects is a huge thing, and it's something that's how I approach it. Very much feeling that before I even play a note. It's like this isn't just an abstract piece of music. You know, it's experience. It's incredibly personal to all of us. We all lose people, and we will all die. It's so much part of the Requiem, so much part of our musical culture for hundreds of years as well. Feels more timely than ever. I mean, a Requiem is always timely, but there's something about as you say, the uncomfortable nature of the music. It is uncomfortable at times, hugely uncomfortable. But I find it, coming back to it a little older, even more intensely moving. Yes, the music can be challenging, but it's never challenging for long. I mean, I know people who came last time to the concert who'd never heard any choral music. You know, they had a completely different background. You know, we had friends of friends who came. And were utterly in awe of it and blown away and taken on the journey, even though they didn't know the choral tradition necessarily, and they didn't maybe understand 12-note rows or are used to the feeling of atonality.
So, massive thanks to Tom and Ralph for interviewing with me, and we were able to put together their thoughts. And some of you have pointed out, you know, getting those explanations from Tom about the way the guitar is making the noises, I think is, you know, really helpful actually in terms of understanding how the guitar works, electric guitar works, but also this piece in particular, which really aims to blend the sort of the choral, soft edges of choral music with that softer guitar sound that you heard, and then the more chanting music and the more dissonant choral sound with the more dissonant and angry and edgy guitar sounds. So thank you guys for that. Brilliant. So I've got some questions. Thank you for your questions. We'll start off with Jeff, Nigel's comment, sorry. It's because you have Nigel Jeff written on the Facebook name, Nigel. You said, why use a 12-note row? Well, as I say, the 12-note row is associated with sort of ultra dissonance, and so in seeking to get dissonant sound, it was an obvious place to go. There's also, I think, a sense of mystery, or there is for me anyway, about serial music. There's something quite mysterious and wonderful, and although it's not a style I've ever composed in regularly, I sort of love the the way it's sort of laid out, and there's different ways of doing it, of course. So for me, it was an opportunity to use a 12-note row in a very sort of lyrical way, but then also to use it to create dissonance, which leads on to a question you asked, Ralph, about what's the difference between using 12 semitones and 11, because it's all quite dissonant by the time you've got to that many that many different pitches. So why use 12? Well, I suppose there's a kind of perfection in my head about using all 12. In the Western chromatic tradition, there's these 12 semitones, and so there's a sense that you can that's the whole harmonic picture, and somehow using all 12 of them is mysterious and complete. And again, sort of the resonances with the concepts of death and the themes of death, that they kind of resonated with me, and I could sort of connect those together. Interestingly, on the new download version, you'll see the artwork is this wonderful image that was embroidered by my mum, and she was a wonderful embroiderer, and her process was very. I love these figures because they drift in and out of the colour. And whilst I can't say that embroidery is the inspiration of the Requiem, I did watch her make these tapestries and embroideries from a very early age, and without realising it, actually, I picked something up from her, which was the ability to sort of add things and see how it's going, and then sort of stand back, and then, there was a kind of organic, slightly improvised approach to her creating those, and that is the method that I use musically, sort of improvising in and then adding things. You do use your analytical mind, of course, and she did on her embroideries, but there's also an intuitive thing that you get. And so whilst my Requiem is not about my mum and dad as such, they both came to the Requiem, and it provoked quite a lot of discussions about death, that I was very pleased when they had died, that I'd had those conversations with them. Susan, you're asking, could another solo instrument take the part of the electric guitar? Interesting. Ralph and I made an organ version. Well, Ralph made it because the organ is probably the only other solo instrument with a big range of colours. If you've got a big instrument. I have heard one full performance in Germany in the organ version, and it seemed to go down very well. I mean, for me, there's a luminosity, isn't there, in the guitar and the way it sort of billows out at you that is hard to replicate any other way. So my kind of preferred version is really the guitar version, just with all those fantastic colours that Tom was talking about. And another question you were asking, Nigel, on that front was, do I play the guitar? I did play the guitar when I was a teenager, and I love the guitar. I mean, I'm no good at the guitar, but I can play it a little bit. Yes, I had to get to know. I mean, a lot of those sounds are sounds that we know from rock music, from sort of progressive rock bands. those sort of interesting colours, the sort of high stratospheric things, the use of pedals. But I did really need to work with Tom, and we had some sessions at his house, sort of thinking about how do we make some high sounds, and that was a really exciting part. And we didn't really know how they were going to come together until quite late in the day when we started working with the choir and the guitar, together. We actually did an experiment, Ralph and Tom and I got permission from Guildford Cathedral to go in there. This was before we did the premiere, and try out electric guitar in a big acoustic. And Guildford is certainly a big acoustic. So we rocked up. You know how quiet it is there, those of you who are Guildford based watching this a lot of the time. And we set up the amp, etc., and started playing things in these soft sounds, which were quite eerie and sort of through the building. And then Tom was kind of winding it up and getting more into the territory of that big cadenza that he plays with the high levels of distortion, big attack on the strings, and it was thrilling. I mean, it was scary. Actually, it was immediately quite scary, and that is one of the things I think that makes the work when you hear it live, and it does need a big acoustic. I think it really does need the big acoustic. It comes across as an epic thing because the instrument has the ability, literally, to make the make the space ring and kind of reverberate. And then you've got these very high points of volume and noise. And then against these kind of very soft, like in the Pie Jesu, these soft little pin prick notes that are coming out from the guitar and like bells, really. So in answer to your question, Susan, I think personally, I think the guitar is, that's the home of the piece. That is the textures of the piece. I think it's hard to replicate. When I heard it in Germany, it wasn't on the best instrument. It was a fairly early sounding instrument. It's more of a Baroque instrument. I think you need a big romantic or early 20th century instrument with big pad stops, lots of string stops, lots of ability to be very... To get lots of tone colour, lots of changes happening all the time. So I'm not saying it couldn't be very effective in that. It's just that we haven't heard it as it might be yet in that version. Paul, hi Paul. You were saying how you saw the. You noticed the CD sort of in the northeast, for sale in the northeast, but not widely. That's true. The recording that you were listening to there was made by Fairhaven Singers shortly after the premiere, and it was just released on our own Tyalgum Press label, so it wasn't on huge release, and it wasn't in the first instance available online. It's now been re-released. And it's available, so I'm hoping more people will be interested in the piece because of that. Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been as widely done as Mass in Blue. It's a hard piece. I mean, it's not an easy piece for choirs to sing. I'm not saying Mass in Blue is easy to do, but there are some tricky corners to the Requiem. But it's a really dramatic piece, and I think that's something choirs often really like to do, is to be involved in a really dramatic piece of music making, and this certainly is dramatic. So it's not as well known as my other masses. It's true. And actually, for a while, I'll be honest, I found it a hard piece to sort of accept, because it's it's very, very dramatic when you hear it, and as Tom was saying, and as the choir knows, it really captivates the audience. So it's had several performances by Fairhaven singers. It had a performance in Germany. It's been done, I think it was done in Australia. I never heard from those people ever again, so I don't know what happened, whether the concert hall blew up or I don't know. And I heard it. There was a very good performance done in the Netherlands a few years ago. And that was the only one I heard with a different guitarist to Tom, which is another question that someone was asking about, have I ever heard it with another guitarist? The answer is yes, once, with this young guy. He was sort of rock guitarist in the Netherlands. Really fantastic. I know that he and Tom talked, so that Tom was able to give him some of his thoughts on the pedalling, etc. He did a fantastic job. Like Tom, he's virtuoso type player. He did the cadenza completely differently, and that's the whole point of the cadenza, that it should be the up to the instrumentalist to decide what you're going to play, and he did it completely differently to Tom. It was very effective. It was again, the choir really enjoyed working on the piece. So it's a work that my belief in it has got greater as time has gone on. I mean, you mustn't set too much store by that in a way, because, as I think I've alluded to in other talks, the composer's confidence in a piece is not necessarily always great. Ralph mentioned the time in the premiere when I was saying the choir just don't believe in the work. Of course, what I really meant was, I'm terrified that no one will like the work. That's what I was actually saying to Ralph, and I would like to apologise now publicly for saying that to you. I was obviously falling apart under the pressure of the impending premiere. I mean, it does, as a composer, the premiere is a tricky old time. I mean, there's a difference if you're playing in the performance, as I sometimes am on piano, or indeed conducting it. That actually takes the pressure off, because you really have something to focus on, which is music making. If you're in the audience, for me, and I think for a lot of composers, it's quite daunting. You sort of hear everything that you think is going wrong, and you sort of think things are about to go wrong, and it's not good. It's not good. I've learned to try and stay still, because my wife Beth has pointed out to me that sometimes I'm sort of like almost shouting at people who are obviously always doing their absolute best to perform, and I'm not meaning it in an angry way. I'm just so into it, and I just so much want it to go well, and I want them to do well. But I've learned to be much more zen about it, it's a moment in a way that the composer just has to get through, because it's the first time it's being presented to other people. Nigel, you also said the electric guitar is underrated. I mean, I know what you mean. You mean underrated in a sort of classical sense. There have been classical composers who've written for the electric guitar, haven't there? There have been some concerti. But you get an awful lot for one player, don't you, out of that? I mean, it is a tough play, as Tom was saying. There's an awful lot to focus on, but you get this whole world of sounds and sound levels, and there are few instruments. The organ is one of them, but there are few instruments that have that ability. And of course, what the guitar has, I guess, over the organ is this ultra sensitivity, because you can give vibrato, you can pull the notes, you've got very, very complex ability to sort of make different levels of sound, even within a phrase. So it makes it, I think, using it is a very expressive experience. And I will, I'm sure, use the electric guitar again in pieces. In fact, when I first met Tom, we were working on an opera together and using the guitar, not fully in the way we ended up with the Requiem, but that was kind of the starting point. Some of those softer sounds and some of the noise sort of started at that time. So yeah, I mean, I think I have. I hope I've sort of answered all your questions. Shout in the chat if I haven't. It's a work. For me. It's a work that frightened me when I first wrote it. And I was saying this to both Ralph and Tom, and actually the process of streaming it, of the CD coming out again, and preparing for this talk made me look at the piece 10 years on, longer than 10 years on, 12 years on, and realise that what many of my close friends and trusted music friends have always said to me, which is that they think it's, possibly the best piece I've ever written, or certainly one of the best pieces. I couldn't really see that. I found it so sort of dramatic when it was first presented that I struggled. I mean, there's part of composers, or there's part of this composer that sort of wants to be everyone's friend all the time, and that the music is sort of gentle and works on us gently and beautifully, and there's lots of music that does that, and I've written lots of music that can do that, and I'm proud of that. And that's one of music's great things it can give us, is this sort of gentle wash of emotion. But of course, music is a wide spectrum of emotions, and so are we the listeners, and we do actually delight in more extreme spectrums in some pieces of music. It does speak to us, and actually, looking back at the Requiem, I think I've done it probably more effectively than I realised at the time. Part of that might be because, as you could hear in the presentation, that's why I wanted particularly Tom to sort of talk to you in that presentation. As you can see, you're handing over a lot to this instrumentalist. A lot of the notes that they play are written down, but the sounds are just suggested. You've got to work on them. I noticed Ralph saying in the comments just there that you need a guitarist to be part of the process. Tom's a great player, but he's an even better musician, and he understands choir, and he does. And I suppose you wouldn't want to sort of drop in the guitarist for their first experience of working with the choir sort of on the day of performing. You'd want to kind of integrate them with the choir over time to get the best out of it. So I think that process of sort of handing over quite a lot to Tom, again, it was scary, and probably sort of affected my sort of emotions about the piece as well, to some extent. Ralph, you've asked a question. It's a non-Requiem question, if that's allowed. I think it's allowed, particularly from you, my friend, because you've been such a great supporter of my music, and this piece in particular. What am I writing now? Okay, so specifically, I'm writing a set of leader songs for solo voice, baritone and piano for our good friend Gareth, and I'm enjoying that. Just started working on that. I'm at the stage with that piece where I've sort of covered a lot of my sheets of paper with stuff, and nothing's really coming together yet, but that's fine. That is part of the process for me. It's a sort of gardening phase where I'm sort of pottering around the musical garden, sort of looking at things and snipping bits off, and not quite sure, what I'm doing. I mean, it's scary as well. I'll be honest, every time I write a piece of music, there is a moment where I think I really don't know what on earth I'm doing with this. lots of creatives experience that, I know, in all mediums. So yeah, I'm working on those. I've got some quite big commissions coming up next year for choral pieces, and trying to sort of juggle that. That obviously the concerts are starting to come back into our lives, which is very, very exciting. But for me, one of the few pluses of concerts not happening was that I wasn't spending time doing concerts. I love doing concerts, as you know, but of course I was able to spend more time composing. So actually, I'm up to date really with everything that I've got to write, which is pretty good. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to wind things up. Thanks for your excellent questions. The recording of the Requiem for Voices and Electric Guitar, which is by Thomas Gray, Bethany Halliday, soprano, the Fairhaven Singers, and conducted by Ralph Woodward, is downloadable and streamable from all the usual platforms. Please use the name of the piece rather than my name. And the reason for that is this is categorised as an electroacoustic work, and the way the metadata works on that is it goes towards the performers, it homes in on the performers, and the name, the composer is there but you won't find it in the search, so best to put in the Requiem for Voices and Electric Guitar, and you'll find it on Spotify and Apple Music and other platforms. So please have a listen to the whole thing. I hope you enjoy it. 16th of April is the next one of these. I'll be talking about writing my Passion music, which was written for St Martin in the Fields in 2018. And finally, in May, I'll be talking about my opera Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which was commissioned and produced by Opera Holland Park. So do join me if you can for those, and let others know who may be interested. There's details on the Facebook page and also on the Will Todd website events. Great to have you with me this evening. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. I'll leave you with a little taster of the next session in a month's time. So thanks for joining me. Take care wherever you are, and see you next time. Bye for now.